Let me share briefly what we're doing in Project FuSSE. And let me start by touching on Nexus. The power of Nexus is amazing for most of the societies it will touch. And to make this even more powerful, it is important to actually help those jurisdictions that do not necessarily have the basic infrastructure to connect to this amazing solution that is Nexus. And the idea with FuSSE is a little bit to help these jurisdictions that do not necessarily have a developed payment system to begin with. Let me start from the very general perspective, and let me tell you three principles that we can observe everywhere. So the first one is that we are facing a significantly increasing demand for settlements in financial infrastructures. And we can see this because we have two elements that are growing significantly. On one side, we have financial inclusion processes that are developing in every country. And on the other side, we have that each person that is included in the financial ecosystem is actually pushing more transactions to the system. And this is not just a one-time thing. If you start thinking about the Internet of Things and how this will integrate with artificial intelligence agents, you might start thinking on how our stuff could start generating transactions on our behalf, and therefore getting all these huge number of transactions into our financial systems. And this is quite important. A second point that is very relevant is that we need to get everyone in. If you think about a digital society and you think people that do not have access to digital payments, you can start thinking about a very significant social problem because people would not have access to all this digital economy, which is fundamental going into the future. And this is something that modern societies cannot take. And the third part is that our financial institutions and our financial market infrastructures were not designed for this environment. So they were designed for very few operations, and they were designed for less people operating within the system. So we need to do something about that. Mainly because if we don't modify and we don't make the settlement efficient, we can actually have an impact on economic decisions, and this is very important. Now, getting into this, we have several problems. So developing and replacing these pieces of infrastructure is not a simple feat. These are complicated monsters, and they're made of many, many different pieces, and we need to make these things quite resilient, because this is not just systemically important, this is critically systemically important. If we stop the way in which people can make transactions in an economy, we actually generate a very significant social problem, which can actually have elements in terms of sovereignty of the countries if we leave that to third parties to provide. And together with this, when we think about the smaller jurisdictions that do not necessarily have the resources, we see the actual problem that we're facing, no? Complicated solutions that cannot be developed for every jurisdiction, but we do have this critically systemic feature on these financial infrastructures, and therefore we are in a conundrum. And here is where the BIS can actually help, by creating community and by allowing for different jurisdictions to join together and provide the services. And the Innovation Hub actually has one of its mandates or its lines of work in terms of developing next generation financial market infrastructures. And FuSSE is just one example of the many pieces of work that have been done within the Innovation Hub. The idea of FuSSE is to generate a back-end piece of technology that can serve for different financial market infrastructures and help with the settlement finality, not just for cash, but for many other assets for that matter. And we have tried to develop FuSSE with three principles in mind. The first one is that this system has to be future-proof. So we know what we have now with technology, but we don't know what we will have tomorrow. So we have to create a system that can evolve over time with the technologies and with the needs from society. The second principle is that this needs to be cyber secure and cyber resilient in terms of business continuity. We cannot have a systemic, or more so a critically systemic piece of infrastructure without having cybersecurity and business continuity. And the third principle is that it needs to be efficient and it needs to be sustainable over time, because we don't want this just to be feasible for larger jurisdictions. We want this to be feasible for everyone. Let me go deeper into these three principles. The first one, in terms of future-proofing, I will give you three sub-principles, if you wish. The first one is that the system is built on a modular perspective to give it flexibility. The system as a whole is a module. So you can take this code and you can plug it in the back of a retail RTGS, or you could plug it in the back of a account-based CBDC, retail CBDC, or you could plug it in the back end of a security settlement system. Thinking about how we can enhance different financial market infrastructures with one common piece of technology, so making the system a module itself. But we're thinking about this system not just as a module, but as composed by modules. So if you take this thing apart, you will see that this is like Lego pieces. And we have different functionalities that when you put them in one way, they can settle one type of transactions. But if you build them in a different way, you can settle a different type of process within the financial market infrastructure. And this has the idea of trying to reuse functionality that is common among different types of settlement and different types of processes that financial market infrastructures need to put forth. The second element that we need to think about in terms of the future is how we do scalability, and we need to consider many transactions, we need to consider many people instructing to the system, and we need to consider what Tony and Tom very clearly pointed out, many assets settling in the same platform so that we can get these cross-settlement purposes going forward. And the third one is that we need to use technologies that allow us for this resiliency. And these are distributed technologies, and let me be very clear, this is not distributed ledger technologies. These are just distributed technologies under an FMI operator. And these distributed technologies under an FMI operator with the scalability element and the modularity allow us to create a system that is evolvable over time, both with the new technologies that may come in the future and also with the new requirements from a functional perspective. In order to do a critically systemic system or to contribute to the creation of critically systemic infrastructures, we need to consider confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the information. And for that, we try to get into the system as much as possible what we know about the future, which is quantum computers will come in. So we did this quantum resistant, and we also tried to make this as flexible as possible so that we're crypto agile. In case something breaks down, we can just replace that piece for the new technology that is resistant to whatever is coming to us. This also allows for non-similar facilities, which basically mean that if you want to provide the same functionality, you can do so by creating the Lego piece that has exactly the same function, but it's built with a completely different technology. So if you are hit in one particular technology, you can just replace that Lego piece for another one that is built on another technology, but the function is the same, and you can integrate the system completely. We want to be efficient in terms of how we spend resources because we want this to be available for the smallest country and for the largest country. And this is why we needed to take advantage of open source. So we are bringing in elements that were developed in an open source perspective. And we're trying to generate the system in a way that it provides a platform for the creation of new modules and for this to be a community. And for this to be a community, we want this to be perceived as a public good in which everyone can put in and that is available for everyone to basically use for the particular needs of the jurisdictions. And this is why we're trying to analyze the pros and cons of putting this in completely open source or just making this open source within the central banking community so that we can build together and create these communities. And talking about communities, we're also working on generating these workshops regarding the technology that we're using in FuSSE so that we can start creating community among the central banks and just discussing about these deeper IT elements, thinking about the comments that were made yesterday regarding the need for central banks to actually start developing these new human capital perspectives. It is quite important to create these communities. Finally, where we are, we have already developed about 50% of the modules of this thing, and about 3 weeks ago, we published an interim report in which we generate the signature and signature verification processes with quantum-resistant technology, and this is available both as a paper and the code can be accessed by request. We have also had several of these technical workshops so that people interested in the different central banks can actually join these workshops and start looking at the technologies that we're using. And the idea is that by the first quarter of 2025, we'll have the full cryptographic suite complete, so both including communications, encryption, and the signature and signature verification, which we already have. We'll have the full functionality, the basic functionality, and the monitors to see what is going on in the system. Finally, just to leave something at the end, is we have this partnership with the Inter-American Development Bank and the Bank of Canada, and we are opening this up to central banks that might be interested in joining this community of development to push forward this type of solutions and to build together the next generation financial market infrastructures. Thank you so much.